The conference room on the 34th floor of Vantage Capital Partners smelled like leather and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking downtown Austin, the kind of view that was supposed to make you feel like you'd arrived somewhere. I'd sat in that room 100 times. I'd led product architecture sessions there, walked investors through roadmaps, celebrated acquisitions. I knew every scratch on that mahogany table. I didn't know it would be the last room I'd ever sit in as an employee of that company. My name is Tristan Cole. I'm 41 years old. In the morning of Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, I walked into a quarterly performance review and walked out with nothing. Not a box, not a handshake, not even the dignity of being escorted out by HR. Just 4 words from a man I had called family. We're letting you go. But here's what my father-in-law, Lawrence Wexler, didn't know when he said those words across that polished table. He didn't know what I had built in the years before I met his daughter. He didn't know what was sitting quietly in accounts and holding companies he'd never heard of. He didn't know that the man he'd just fired was the single most dangerous person he could have made an enemy of. And he definitely didn't know that the next call I made after walking out of that building would begin something that would cost him everything he thought he owned. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get settled, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. But this story doesn't start on October 17th, 2023. It starts 6 years earlier, at a rooftop fundraiser in the 2nd Street District in Austin, on a warm Thursday night in April 2017. I was there because my college friend Derek Okafor had insisted. "You haven't been out since you closed the Series B," Derek had said. "You're turning into one of those guys who only talks to his monitors." I had told him that was a reasonable lifestyle. He told me I needed professional help. So I went. Open collar, sport coat, club soda. I was planning 60 minutes and 4 introductions, then back to my condo in East Austin to read the acquisition term sheet sitting in my inbox. That's when I saw Danielle Wexler. She was across the rooftop, talking to a group of people with the relaxed confidence of someone who had grown up in rooms like this. Dark hair, a green dress, an easy laugh that carried over the ambient jazz. She caught me looking and didn't look away. She walked over. "You don't look like you want to be here." I glanced around. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. "Only to someone who also doesn't want to be here. That was the beginning of us." For 2 hours, Danielle and I stood in a corner of that rooftop and talked about everything that wasn't networking. She told me she'd studied urban planning at UT Austin, that she was working in her father's commercial real estate development firm, that she felt most alive during long drives through the Texas Hill Country with no particular destination. She asked me what I did. I told her I built software infrastructure for enterprise clients. I kept it deliberately vague, not because I was hiding anything, but because I'd learned early that specific numbers changed the way people looked at you. She seemed relieved by the vagueness, said she was tired of men who led with their valuations. I liked that about her, or I liked who I thought she was. It's a distinction I'd understand much better later. What Danielle thought she knew about me that Thursday night: quiet software guy, comfortable but not flashy, works hard, doesn't own the room. What was actually true: 5 years before I met her, I had co-founded a company called Arcway Systems, enterprise-grade infrastructure software for healthcare and logistics networks. We'd built it over 7 years, taken 1 round of institutional capital, turned profitable in year 4, and sold it to a private equity consortium based in Boston, for a figure that my CPA still describes as uncomfortable to type. No press release, no announcement. I flew home from the closing dinner in Boston, ordered migas from a place on South Congress, and watched a documentary about the James Webb Telescope. That was it. The money went into a holding company called Blue Meridian Group that I'd incorporated in Delaware before the ink was even dry on the sale. Real estate across 4 markets, minority stakes in 12 companies, 3 of which I'd watched quietly become significant. A private investment portfolio managed by a woman named Catherine Yuen in San Francisco, who I trusted completely and spoke to twice a month. I hadn't told anyone except my attorney and Derek. Derek, because he'd been my roommate at UT and knew my bank balance before I had one. And my attorney, because he literally needed to know. Danielle didn't know any of it. I was, in her reading of things, a well-compensated software architect with a nice condo and sensible spending habits. That reading suited me fine. We dated for 14 months before I proposed. The proposal was quiet. A Sunday evening, my roof deck, the Austin skyline going gold at dusk. She said yes before I finished the sentence. The wedding was at a vineyard in Fredericksburg, Texas. 200 people, many of them Lawrence Wexler's business associates. Lawrence had built Wexler Holdings over 30 years into a mid-size commercial real estate empire with holdings across Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas. He was the kind of man who wore his net worth in the crispness of his collar, who always knew the assessed value of every property he walked into, who measured people by their trajectory rather than their character. He'd measured me and found me acceptable. Not remarkable, acceptable. The quiet software guy who didn't embarrass himself at dinner and seemed steady enough for his daughter. I could see it in his eyes at our first meeting over steaks at Uchi. A tolerant respect with an asterisk. I recognized that asterisk. I'd spent years making myself look like someone else's asterisk. It was one of the more useful things I'd ever learned to do. Lawrence made me a job offer 3 months after the wedding. Director of Technology Strategy at Wexler Holdings. He framed it as an opportunity. The company was expanding into PropTech, wanted to build out a digital infrastructure layer, needed someone who understood both software architecture and business scale. The salary was generous. The title was real. I took it, not because I needed it, not because I was bored. I took it because Danielle wanted us to build something together in her family's world, and at that point, I still believed we were building something together. I should have listened more carefully to what she wanted. Not the words she used, but what was underneath them. The way she talked about her father's opinion as if it was always the room's final answer. The way she deferred to his judgment on things that shouldn't have involved him. The way she'd sometimes go quiet for days after family dinners, like she was recalibrating to a frequency I couldn't access. But I was in it. So I stayed in it. I worked at Wexler Holdings for 3 years. I built their data infrastructure from the ground up. Tenant analytics platforms, predictive maintenance systems, an acquisition modeling tool that Lawrence's team used on 7 deals, and credited with improving their underwriting accuracy by 31%. I hired a team of 11 engineers. I helped close 2 of the largest acquisitions in the company's history, and throughout all of it, Lawrence Wexler looked at me with the same tolerant acceptance. Competent, useful, the husband, not an equal, not a partner, the husband. The first time I felt the floor shift was a Sunday dinner at the Wexler House in Terrytown, a beautiful property on a ridge above Lake Austin, the kind of house that made architectural statements. Danielle's brother, Preston, was there. Preston was 38, had never run anything successfully in his life, and carried himself with the permanent confidence of a man who had never been required to earn his own approval. He'd just been named COO of Wexler Holdings after a 2-year stint as a VP that everyone on my team privately called decorative. At dinner, Lawrence mentioned a strategic acquisition opportunity in the Denver market. He was explaining his thinking, looking around the table. He asked Preston what he thought. He asked Danielle what she thought. He asked Miriam, his wife. He did not ask me. I was the Director of Technology Strategy. The deal was a mixed-use development with a significant PropTech component. I had already sent Lawrence a 12-page analysis of the opportunity the previous Wednesday. He hadn't acknowledged receiving it. "What do you think, Tristan?" Miriam asked, filling the silence. "I think the analysis speaks for itself," I said, looking at Lawrence. "I sent it Wednesday." Right, Lawrence said, cutting his steak. "Good work on that." He moved on. I looked at Danielle. She was looking at her plate. That was November 2021. I filed the moment away. I file everything. The months that followed were an education in being invisible in plain sight. I watched Preston make decisions I would have flagged as problems. I watched Lawrence overrule my recommendations with reasoning that didn't hold up technically. I watched the company I'd spent 3 years improving be steered back toward instinct and legacy rather than data and precision. And I watched Danielle navigate it all like someone who had long ago made peace with the geometry of her family's power structure. She was warm with me privately. She was deferential to her father professionally. And she never, not once, went to bat for me in a room where it cost her something. I want to be precise about the moment everything changed. Not gradually, not in stages. There was a specific moment, the kind that feels quiet when it happens, but that you understand later was everything. It was a Saturday morning in June 2022. Danielle was on a call with Preston. I was in the kitchen making coffee, not eavesdropping, just present. The walls in our house in Rollingwood are not particularly thick. I heard her say, "He doesn't really understand how Dad thinks." I heard her say, "He's good at what he does, but it's not really our world." I heard her say, "I'm not sure it's a long-term fit." She was talking about me, to her brother, about whether I was a long-term fit. I stood in the kitchen for a moment with my coffee mug in my hand. The coffee was hot. The morning was quiet. Outside, a cardinal was working through something in the backyard oak tree. I did not walk to the other room and confront her. I did not ask her to clarify what she meant. I put the coffee down on the counter. I went to my home office and opened my laptop. And I started doing what I do, which is build things carefully and quietly where nobody can see them. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor: subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me tell you something about architecture. Not software architecture, physical architecture. The best buildings in the world don't look complex from the outside. They look inevitable. You walk up to them and think, of course it was built this way. That simplicity is the result of thousands of invisible decisions, layers of engineering that you never see because they're designed not to be seen. That's how I approach everything, including the 16 months that followed that Saturday morning in June 2022. The first call I made was to a man named Fletcher Grady. Fletcher had been my attorney since company number 1. He was based in Houston, looked like someone's uncle, played competitive chess on weekends, and was one of the 6 sharpest people I'd ever met in my life. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to restructure some things," I told him. "How soon?" "Start this week." Fletcher asked what I was expecting. I told him I wasn't sure exactly, but that I wanted everything that was mine separated from everything that wasn't with the kind of precision that would survive whatever came next. He told me he'd cancel his Thursday afternoon. I told him I appreciated it. The restructuring took most of the summer. Blue Meridian Group was already clean, a separate entity from my marriage, funded entirely by premarital capital. But I had done some things since the wedding that needed tidying. Some investments I'd made jointly with Danielle on paper, a brokerage account with her name attached. Fletcher unwound those carefully, cleanly, with the kind of documentation that made every transaction legible and defensible. Then I started building the new thing. I'd been watching the commercial real estate technology space for 2 years from inside Wexler Holdings. I knew exactly what the market needed and exactly where the existing solutions were failing. I also knew the names of the people in that space who were good. The engineers, the product managers, the data scientists who were undervalued and restless. I had a lunch, then another lunch, then a dinner. All of them in the same week, all of them in different parts of Austin. South Lamar, the Domain, East 6th. Casual, no agenda stated explicitly, just old acquaintances checking in. Nobody knew they were being recruited because technically they weren't. Not yet. I incorporated a new entity in Delaware in August 2022 under the name ClearPath Technology Group, an operating company. Software infrastructure for commercial real estate analytics, the exact space Wexler Holdings had been fumbling at for 3 years. I funded it entirely from Blue Meridian. I was not on the masthead. The founding team, on paper, was 3 people. A woman named Sasha Trimble, who'd been a product lead at a PropTech firm in Denver, a data architect named Jerome Whitfield, who I'd worked with at Arcway Systems, and an engineer named Phoebe Kwan, who I'd met at a conference in Dallas, and immediately identified as one of the most technically precise people I'd encountered in years. They were real. Their equity was real. Their work was real. I was the silent investor and strategic advisor, accessible only through a single email address that connected to a shell entity. ClearPath launched quietly in December 2022. By February 2023, they had their first 3 clients. By May 2023, they had 11, including 2 of Wexler Holdings' direct competitors in the Texas market. By August, a venture firm in San Francisco had reached out with a term sheet. I watched all of this from my desk at Wexler Holdings, where I was still building the company's data infrastructure, still attending Monday strategy sessions, still presenting quarterly reports to a man who appreciated my work the way you appreciate a reliable appliance. Danielle and I had dinner every night. I asked about her day. She told me about it. I told her about mine, the edited version. She had grown more distant over the months, but had not, as far as I could tell, taken any formal steps. Maybe she was waiting. Maybe she was watching. I had learned to do the same. October 17th, 2023. The quarterly performance review was already on my calendar. Standard process. The director team, Lawrence, and the CFO, a man named Bradley Sutton, who collected vintage watches and never made eye contact. I sat down at the mahogany table. Fletcher was on my phone in my jacket pocket, with explicit instructions to stay on the line. Lawrence didn't open with pleasantries. He opened with a folder. Tristan. He set the folder on the table. We've completed our performance assessment. There are some concerns I want to address directly. I looked at the folder. I looked at Lawrence. The technology division has been underperforming relative to the investment we've made in it, he said. The acquisition modeling tool had projection variances in the last 2 cycles. The tenant platform rollout has been slower than projected, and there are some concerns about cultural fit at the leadership level. Cultural fit. There it was. Cultural fit, I repeated. We're a family company, Tristan. He kept his voice very even. We need leadership that operates in alignment with our values and our vision for how this company grows. We don't think that's been the case. Bradley Sutton stared at the table. To his credit, he at least looked uncomfortable. We're letting you go, Lawrence said. Effective today. Performance issues. I want to be honest about what happened in my chest when he said that. It wasn't rage. It wasn't surprise. It was something that felt almost like the satisfying click of a mechanism engaging. The feeling you get when a complex system executes exactly the way you designed it to. Because Lawrence Wexler had just made the one move I had been waiting for. I see, I said. I closed the folder without opening it. I'll gather my things. Lawrence seemed to have been expecting something else. Pushback, maybe. Questions. Perhaps some version of a plea. What he got was a man who stood up calmly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the elevator. In the elevator, I pressed the ground floor button and quietly said, "Did you get that?" Fletcher Grady, on my phone in my jacket pocket, said, "Every word. I'm already drafting." I drove home to Rollingwood in the October afternoon. The Hill Country Light was doing something beautiful with the cedar trees. I took the long way around Lake Austin because I wasn't in a hurry and I wanted to think. I thought about 3 years of Sunday dinners at the Terrytown house, about the 12-page analysis that Lawrence had acknowledged like it was a grocery receipt, about Preston's decorative COO title, and the Denver deal I'd correctly identified as a structural risk 18 months before it lost the company $4 million. About Danielle's voice through the kitchen walls. Not really our world. I parked in the driveway at 3:47 in the afternoon. I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house. It was a good house. We'd chosen it together. I went inside. Danielle was in the living room. She was dressed, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon when she worked from home. She was holding a piece of paper. No, several pieces of paper, stapled together. She set them on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" I said, though some part of me already knew. "Dad called me," she said. Her voice was steady and controlled, the voice she used in professional contexts. "He told me what happened. I've been thinking about this for a while, Tristan. I think we both know this has been heading somewhere." She paused. "Now that the job situation has changed, I think this is the right time." I picked up the papers. Divorce petition, already filled in. Her attorney's name at the top, Patricia Voss, of the Austin office of Voss and Hartley. Efficient woman. I'd heard of her. Danielle reached beside the couch and set something else on the coffee table. A printed list. I looked at it. It was a list of homeless shelters and transitional housing programs in the Austin area. Highlighted. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, and I will give her credit for maintaining eye contact when she said it. "But I want to be honest. Now that the job isn't there anymore, the position that made this work, I think we've both known for a while this isn't what either of us needs." There was a silence in that living room that had a shape to it. The shape of everything she thought she understood about me, about what I had, about what I was without Lawrence Wexler's organization behind me. I picked up the shelter list. I set it back down. "Okay," I said. I went upstairs and packed a bag. Not everything. A bag. Enough for a week. I didn't cry. I didn't slam anything. I walked through the bedroom we'd shared for 5 years with the specific calm of a man who knows that what is happening is simply the beginning of something else. I drove to the Four Seasons on West Cesar Chavez. Checked into a suite on the 8th floor. Looked out at the Colorado River going gold in the late afternoon light. Then I called Fletcher Grady. "She left a shelter list," I said. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Tristan." Fletcher meant it. "Don't be," I said. "It's exactly what I needed to see. Begin everything." Fletcher knew what everything meant. He'd been holding the architecture for 6 months. Now it was time to build the rest. Let me tell you about what everything looked like. ClearPath Technology Group, by October 2023, had 17 clients, had turned profitable, and was in the middle of a Series A conversation with 2 different venture firms. The term sheet on the table from a San Francisco firm called Sequoia's competitor, a firm called Brightfield Ventures, was for $12 million at a valuation of $41 million. Jerome, Sasha, and Phoebe's collective equity stake was worth something real. Mine was worth something significant. Wexler Holdings was one of the companies ClearPath had not pursued as a client. There was a reason for that. I needed Wexler Holdings to remain unaware of ClearPath's existence for as long as possible, because while I was building ClearPath, I was also doing something else. The commercial real estate market in Austin had been moving fast and getting dangerous. I had watched Lawrence Wexler make 3 acquisitions in the past 18 months using the modeling tool I'd built, but using it incorrectly, without the updated assumptions I had tried to brief him on, without accounting for the interest rate environment shifting. I had documented my concerns in 3 separate memos. He had acknowledged them with the same energy he'd brought to the 12-page Denver analysis. The 3 properties Wexler Holdings had acquired in that period were not performing to projection. 2 of them were in the South Austin mixed-use corridor that had been slower to absorb than the market had expected. One was a Class A office building in the Domain that had 31% occupancy in a market that no longer needed Class A office space the way it had in 2019. These were not catastrophic problems. Not yet. But they were the kind of structural weaknesses that compound. In a rising interest rate environment, with a balance sheet that had been stretched by those acquisitions, Wexler Holdings was more fragile than anyone outside the company knew. I knew because I had built their financial modeling system. I understood it better than anyone except Fletcher, who had received my analysis in September in a 60-page document titled Strategic Overview, WH Portfolio Risk Assessment. 60 pages. Lawrence's report had been 11 pages. I had come back with 60. In the weeks following October 17th, I did 3 things. The first was clean. I filed a formal wrongful termination response through Fletcher, citing the pretextual nature of the performance claims. Specifically, the fact that every metric Lawrence cited in that conference room was contradicted by the documented record I had retained copies of since 2021. The modeling tool's projection variances had been flagged by me in writing. The rollout delay on the tenant platform was the result of a directive from Preston overriding my timeline, also documented in writing. The cultural fit claim was exactly what it sounded like. Pretext. Fletcher did not file this immediately. He sent it to Patricia Voss with a cover letter explaining that it existed and that it would be filed unless the divorce proceedings were conducted in a manner consistent with full financial disclosure. Patricia Voss is a very good attorney. She called Lawrence Wexler. Lawrence Wexler called Danielle. Danielle called me. I did not answer. The second thing I did involved a man named Carter Delgado. Carter was a commercial real estate reporter at the Austin Business Journal who had been trying to get an interview with me for 2 years about the PropTech space. I had declined politely every time. I called him in November 2023 and told him I had something worth his attention. I did not give him information about Wexler Holdings. I gave him information about ClearPath. Carter wrote a piece that ran in December 2023 about emerging Austin-based PropTech companies disrupting the commercial real estate analytics space. ClearPath was featured prominently. So was the Brightfield Ventures term sheet, which was now public. So was the client list, which now included 5 names that any commercial real estate professional in Austin would recognize. Lawrence Wexler recognized them. 2 of them had been in conversations with Wexler Holdings about technology partnerships for their own portfolios. His assistant called my cell on a Thursday morning in December. Mr. Wexler would like to schedule a call. I did not call back. The third thing was the one that took the most patience. One of ClearPath's clients was a private equity firm called Ridgecrest Partners, based in Dallas, that focused on commercial real estate acquisition in the Sun Belt. Ridgecrest had been watching the Austin market. They were not interested in Wexler Holdings. They were interested in 2 specific properties in Wexler Holdings' portfolio, the South Austin mixed-use assets that were underperforming. They wanted to understand if those assets might become available at the right price if the pressure on Wexler Holdings' balance sheet continued to build. I knew Ridgecrest through a contact in the Brightfield Ventures network. I facilitated an introduction between Ridgecrest's managing director, a man named Owen Farley, and a real estate banking contact of mine in Houston who could conduct the appropriate market analysis. I did not tell Owen Farley that I had a personal connection to Wexler Holdings. I did not need to. I simply provided context about the market and made sure that people who needed to be talking to each other were in the same room. Owen Farley is a very patient man with a very long memory. He does not move quickly. He moves correctly. By January 2024, the divorce proceedings had become interesting. Patricia Voss had disclosed our marital financial picture. Jointly titled property, joint accounts, the life we'd built from my Wexler Holdings salary. She had, in her disclosure, omitted any reference to Blue Meridian Group because Danielle didn't know it existed. She had omitted ClearPath because nobody outside Fletcher, Jerome, Sasha, and Phoebe knew I was involved with it. She had disclosed my assets as salary from Wexler Holdings, terminated, a personal brokerage account, and a 2021 model truck. Fletcher submitted our disclosure the following week. It was 43 pages. Patricia Voss is an excellent attorney. I have genuine respect for her, but even excellent attorneys are only as comprehensive as their clients allow them to be. And Danielle had handed Patricia Voss a picture of me that was about as accurate as a crayon drawing of the Sistine Chapel. The 43 pages included the full picture of Blue Meridian Group, 11 investments, real estate holdings in 4 states, the structure of the entity, the complete capitalization history showing every dollar had entered before the wedding. They included ClearPath Technology Group, my silent founding position, my current equity stake, the $41 million Series A valuation. They included 3 additional investment positions I had taken through Blue Meridian in the previous 18 months, each of which had appreciated. Fletcher told me later that Patricia Voss read the disclosure, closed her office door, and did not emerge for 35 minutes. Then she called Lawrence Wexler. The call I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday morning in February 2024. Not from Danielle, not from Patricia Voss, from Lawrence Wexler himself, directly to my cell, which told me everything I needed to know about how the geometry of the situation had shifted. Tristan. His voice was the voice of a man standing on ice that he has just realized is thinner than advertised. I think we need to talk. Lawrence, I said. I was in my office, not the Four Seasons anymore. I had moved into a proper space in the WeWork on Congress Avenue while the permanent space I'd leased in the 2nd Street district was being finished. I agree. There seems to have been some miscommunication about your situation, he said carefully. Some of the information we had when we made the decision in October was apparently incomplete. Apparently, I said. I'm wondering if there's a way to revisit the arrangement. Your contribution to the technology division was real, Tristan. The team you built. Lawrence. I cut him off gently, the way you stop a machine that's running down a path with no useful destination. The decision you made in October was made with full information. You knew my performance record. You made a choice about who belonged in your world and who didn't. I respect that. I paused. I just want to make sure we both understand that the choice has consequences that go both directions. Silence. What do you want? He said. I looked out the window at Congress Avenue, at the Texas Capitol dome, white against the February sky. I want the divorce handled correctly, I said. Full and fair accounting, conducted transparently. I want the wrongful termination claim resolved without litigation. Fletcher will handle the specifics with your counsel, and I want the record corrected. The documentation that was submitted to the Texas Workforce Commission citing performance issues. That record needs to be corrected. Another silence. Longer. And in exchange? In exchange, I remain an investor and not a complicating factor. I let that sit for a moment. I have a 3% stake in two of your competitors' analytics infrastructure through ClearPath. I have no particular interest in directing that relationship in any particular direction, but I want to be clear that my interests and Wexler Holdings' interests can coexist peacefully, or they cannot. That's going to depend on how this process goes. I wasn't threatening him. I want to be precise about that. I was giving him the same complete information I always provided. The thing he had spent 3 years not particularly valuing. He had that information now. What he did with it was his business. Lawrence Wexler is a smart man. That's worth saying. He built a real company over 30 years. He just made the mistake of underestimating someone who didn't make noise. I'll have our attorneys reach out to Fletcher, he said. I appreciate that, I said. I hung up. I looked at the Texas Capitol. It was a clear February morning, cold and bright. The kind of Austin winter day that reminds you the city is more serious than it lets on. My phone buzzed, almost immediately. Not Lawrence. Danielle. I looked at the name on the screen for a moment. Then I answered. Tristan. Her voice was different from the voice she had used when she handed me the shelter list. That voice had been controlled, scripted, executive. This voice was smaller. I didn't know about any of it. I want you to understand that. Dad didn't tell me. I know, I said. I'm sorry. About what I said to Preston. About the list. A pause. About a lot of things. I thought about a Thursday night in April 2017. A rooftop in the 2nd Street district. A woman in a green dress who walked over and said, "You don't look like you want to be here." I had thought for a long time that she was the most interesting person in that room. I had thought for a long time that we were the same kind of person. I don't know if that was ever true. I know it stopped being true somewhere in the years between that rooftop and the Saturday morning in June 2022, when I stood in the kitchen and learned I was not a long-term fit. I know you are, I said, and I meant it. Not as forgiveness, not as an invitation, just as a plain statement of fact. But I think you know this is done. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was very quiet. Yeah, she said. I know. We hung up. I sat in my office on Congress Avenue for a while. The morning was moving. People were walking to things on the street below, going somewhere with purpose, carrying the whole ordinary forward momentum of a Tuesday. The divorce was finalized in May 2024. Fletcher and Patricia Voss conducted it with professionalism and precision. The final settlement accounted correctly for the marital estate and separately for my premarital holdings, which were exactly what they were. Mine, documented, clean, and entirely outside the reach of what Danielle had thought she was dealing with. She kept the house in Rollingwood. It was fair. I didn't want it. I moved into a place I'd been watching for 8 months. A restored 1940s building in the Clarksville neighborhood in Austin, half a mile from Pease Park, with a study that faced west and caught the sunset through a bank of windows I had not touched because they were already perfect. I put almost nothing in it except books, a good desk, and a coffee setup that my engineer Phoebe Kwan told me was alarmingly well considered for a man going through a divorce. I took that as a compliment. ClearPath Technology Group closed its Series A in June 2024. Brightfield Ventures led the round. The company's valuation at close was $47 million. Jerome, Sasha, and Phoebe each got the kind of outcome that changes what the rest of your life looks like. I sat on the investor call from my study in Clarksville, watching the sun go down over the cedar trees, and felt the specific satisfaction of something built correctly arriving where it was always going to arrive. In September 2024, Ridgecrest Partners made an offer to acquire 2 of the underperforming South Austin assets from Wexler Holdings. Owen Farley had moved carefully and correctly, the way patient people always do. The price was below what Lawrence had paid, not dramatically, but meaningfully. Enough for it to matter on the balance sheet. Enough for it to require difficult conversations with the board. Lawrence accepted the offer. I found out through Carter Delgado at the Austin Business Journal, who ran a brief item about the transaction. I read it over coffee on a Thursday morning and felt nothing in particular except a mild factual satisfaction, the kind you feel when data confirms a prior assessment. Preston Wexler, I'm told, is no longer COO of Wexler Holdings. He's back in what he describes as consulting, which is another word for available. The Denver deal's delayed reckoning landed on his quarterly reports. Danielle, from what I understand through mutual acquaintances, is doing fine. She's working independently now, consulting in urban planning, which is what she studied before her father's company became the gravity that organized her professional life. That might be the best thing that came out of all of this for her. I genuinely hope it is. My buddy Derek Okafor called me on a Sunday morning in October 2024, exactly 1 year after the conference room. I was making coffee in Clarksville, reading a design document Jerome had sent me about ClearPath's next product release. "You know the anniversary is this week," Derek said. "I'm aware. How does it feel?" I looked around my study, the west-facing windows, the books, the coffee setup that Phoebe had found alarming, the complete, unremarkable piece of a Tuesday morning that belonged entirely to me. "It feels like math," I said. Derek laughed. "That's the least romantic thing anyone has ever said about anything." "I mean it positively," I said. "When math works out the way it should, there's nothing to add to it. The equation is what it is." Derek was quiet for a moment. "You're okay, though? Really okay?" I thought about that honestly, because Derek deserves honesty and because I've been practicing it. I thought about the rooftop in April 2017 and what I had wanted from that night, and what I had wanted from the 14 years I thought I was building. I thought about the cardinal in the backyard oak tree on the morning I heard Danielle through the kitchen wall. I thought about the shelter list on the coffee table and the conference room with the mahogany table and the 4 words that were supposed to end something and instead began something else entirely. I thought about what it means to build things quietly, correctly, in ways that only become visible when someone decides to test them. Not out of meanness, not out of desire for drama, just because that's how structures that last actually get built. "Yeah," I told Derek. "I'm genuinely okay. And the thing about that, the thing I want you to understand if you've been listening this long, is that okay in this context is not a consolation. It's not the smaller thing you settle for when the bigger thing doesn't work out. It's the thing you get to say when you've built something that actually holds, when everything they tried to take from you turned out to be a solid foundation for everything you went and built next." Lawrence Wexler fired me with 4 words on October 17th, 2023. He had spent 3 years seeing an appliance. He missed what was underneath. He missed the patience, the architecture, the 16 months of quiet construction that was already in place before anyone thought to look. Danielle handed me a list of shelters because she thought that's where the situation had left me. She had no idea where I actually was. The most dangerous thing a man can do is let the people who are supposed to know him continue to believe he is smaller than he is. I let them believe it. I let them act on that belief. And then I let the math speak for itself. Blue Meridian Group's portfolio had a 12% appreciation in 2024. ClearPath is expanding to the Dallas and Phoenix markets this spring. My study in Clarksville catches the sunset every evening like it was engineered for it. Fletcher called me last month. He sounded the way he always sounds when something has been resolved correctly, which is to say he sounded like himself. "How's the new chapter?" he asked. I looked out at the cedar trees and the last light going orange above the hill country horizon. Not a chapter, I said. A different book entirely. He laughed. I finished my coffee. Some endings are really just the first line of something better, written in ink you didn't know you were holding.